Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday. This is Seattle Now. Roads in Seattle and Washington state can be dangerous places for pedestrians, cyclists, and other drivers. After peaking in 2023, traffic fatalities around the state are slowly trending down. In a minute, we'll hear from the Washington Traffic Safety Commission about why and where the state can go from here. But first, let's get you caught up. Businesses in unincorporated King County might get some extra time to prepare to accept cash. 3 years ago, the King County Council voted to require retailers to take cash. The goal was to ensure access for people who don't have bank accounts. Businesses got an extra year to prepare back in 2025, and following a vote today could get until 2027 to make that change. The County Council meets this afternoon at 1:30. Some areas of Seattle could be getting denser. The City Council is voting today on a bill to rezone 5 neighborhoods for taller and larger buildings. This would apply to parts of Fremont, Belltown, the U District, Rainier Beach, and the Madison Miller area. The bill would also make it easier to build certain types of low-income and energy-efficient housing. The council will vote at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And 9 p.m. sunsets start today. Yep, the brightest days of the year have finally arrived. The sun will set tonight after 15 hours and 45 minutes of daylight. The longest day of the year is June 21st, when the sun will set at 9:11 p.m. We're back with more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. Traffic deaths in Washington state reached a peak in 2023. 809 people were killed on our roads, the highest number since 1990. Now, for the second straight year, data from the Washington Traffic Safety Commission says fatalities are down, but still far from the ultimate goal of zero. Policy Director Mark McKechnie is here from the commission to talk about what's working and where we can go from here. Mark, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Trish.
Well, now let's start by talking about the report itself. Traffic fatalities are down again this year after a spike in 2023. What's going on?
What we're experiencing right now is some relief from that, where we're seeing them come down about 10% a year. So we're down about 18.5% from that peak in 2023. So we saw improvements across several areas. Most of the main areas that had driven the increases, we saw some relief in speeding, in distraction, in impaired driving, fatalities involving younger drivers, in motorcycle fatalities. One of the few areas we didn't see kind of a proportional decrease was in fatal crashes involving a driver over 70.
What happened in that year in 2023 that made things reach that high peak?
Well, it built during the COVID years. We saw the increases start in 2020 and peak in 2023. Most of the country saw increases during COVID. Two main things were starting off when we had the shutdown during COVID. Streets were pretty empty. That seemed to be interpreted by some people that they can go as fast as they want on our roadways. And unfortunately, some of them seem to have continued even today. The other thing that happened was, I think there's been a lot of research on people's emotional well-being during COVID, that we all suffered in various ways. Kids were out of school, people were at home, some lost their jobs. Related to that, we saw substance use increase, alcohol and other drugs increase during that time when people decide to drive after using alcohol or other drugs that are impairing. That's also a bad combination. Keep in mind that impairment and speed are our top 2 killers already. Sort of the other piece that seems to have made a perfect storm, law enforcement declined significantly at the same time that those high-risk behaviors were increasing. Fortunately, that's picked up quite a bit, and we think that's part of the story of how things have turned around.
What else is working besides maybe those traffic enforcement stops picking up again to deter some more reckless behavior?
Certainly, I think getting the message out, I think people became alarmed about how unsafe they felt on our roads. I think some people have changed their behavior, and they also asked their authorities to do something about it. And when we talk to law enforcement, what they're hearing from their communities is what people are concerned about most is traffic safety. And then there have been some ongoing efforts that I think have helped us, return to a lower level that were in play even before COVID and all the different safety efforts that have been going on for decades, getting people to wear their seatbelts, building safer vehicles. There's also a focus on building safer roads, proliferation of roundabouts, which really help prevent serious crashes at intersections. We're also reconsidering speed limits and setting safer speeds, also enforcing speed limits through automated enforcement. There's also automated red light enforcement. There's really a lot going on, and I think those things that were already in place are part of the picture of returning us to where we wanted to be and reversing those trends so that at least now we're headed in the right direction.
It's funny, you're mentioning a lot of things, automatic traffic enforcement, a change in behavior. When you say that, a change in behavior, I'm thinking about my own behavior as a pedestrian that has changed simply because I think my environment is less safe. Is that something you're also referring to? Have pedestrians changed their behavior?
I think that's hard for us to measure with the kind of information that we have, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised. Again, if communities are saying they feel like their roads are unsafe, then that would include pedestrians who presumably want to protect themselves and might do things somewhat differently. We've also recognized that we're behind on infrastructure as a state for pedestrians and bicyclists to keep them safe. So having complete sidewalks and bike lanes and having safe crossings where we call them vulnerable road users because they're not surrounded by steel cages. So where vulnerable road users and motor vehicles have to cross paths, having better, safer crossings for that to happen. It's in process, but it's still a great need that needs to be addressed.
What about Seattle and King County? Have we seen the same declines in this region here?
King County historically has had a lower per capita fatality rate than the state average. It's about a third lower per 100,000 residents. King County saw a similar decline in 2024 and 2025. So if you looked at the line graph showing fatalities, the shape looks very similar to the state. I think one thing to note about Seattle is that Seattle accounts for roughly a quarter of traffic fatalities in King County, but it represents about a third of the population. So
Okay.
it has fewer fatalities than you would expect just based on population within King County.
There is a lot of talk in our city and region about pedestrian cyclist safety. I can't tell you how many times I hear about cyclists being hit, every day in this city. What sorts of challenges does a really dense, somewhat complicated city like Seattle present when you're trying to reduce traffic deaths? Is it our dynamic environment? Is it the infrastructure? What is it?
It's not one thing at all. We tend to look much more closely at bicyclist and pedestrian deaths every year through our fatality reviews. So we're more than just looking at the high level data, we're actually reading the crash reports and other information. And it's not just infrastructure, it's not just behavior. Impairment is also an important factor in both pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities. Just like drivers, about half of pedestrians and bicyclists killed were impaired by drugs or alcohol. And there are others where it does appear to be a lack of safe infrastructure. Cyclists rightfully would like to see more separation between where they're riding and where automobiles are. For good reason, we see a lot of those collisions involving larger vehicles, pickup trucks, SUVs. One way to address that is having separate lanes where there's actually physical separation, not just a painted line.
I am curious, how are things changing on Seattle streets?
Certainly, Seattle is well known for reducing speeds around the city, and there's research showing that helps reduce serious injuries and fatalities. It certainly helps vulnerable road users, although I will say, when we look at Seattle fatalities, pedestrians make up a disproportionately high share of the fatalities in Seattle compared to the rest of the state. It's also something that may take some time to realize the benefits. There's lowering the speed limits, and then there's getting people to actually slow down. And those two things don't always happen simultaneously. I know that Seattle is looking at expanding the use of speed cameras, which I think will help reinforce those lower speed limits.
The commission proposes and makes these major changes, but how much of this comes down to human behavior, Mark?
Well, certainly policy and behavior interact, and if policies are well designed and well implemented, they can affect behavior. The thing about all types of enforcement is it doesn't affect just the people who get stopped or cited, it affects everyone on the road, right? If you watch any traffic on any road drive by when there's a law enforcement officer present, people change their behavior really quickly. So even if they don't stop a single person, people are checking their speeds. They're going too fast, they tend to slow down. Maybe if they were using their phone, they put the phone down. A lot of things happen. Policies like speed cameras offer that deterrence without having an officer have to sit there 24/7. The camera does that job. They're well marked, they're not secret. So they're there to remind people. They're not there to cite people. They're there to remind everyone who passes through that area. We know that most people know what they should be doing. So sometimes they just need a reminder. Another thing that the legislature did recently that's kind of in process of being implemented is expanding driver education around the state. They're going to provide financial assistance because now that it's not provided in high schools in most areas of the state anymore, it's pretty expensive for a young person to take a driver education course, $600, $700, $800. And so there's going to be a stipend fund for low-income families to get assistance from that. They're also working on expanding the availability of driver education around the state.
As you continue towards the goal of zero traffic deaths, Mark, what comes next?
A little bit of everything. I mean, again, I think impairment, 1 out of every 2 fatalities on our roads involves an impaired driver. Alcohol and cannabis are the 2 most common drugs involved in those crashes. So we really need to focus on getting people not to drive when they're under the influence of alcohol or cannabis or other drugs that are impairing. Speed is a huge one. Again, translates into harm. The force of a crash is determined by the speed. We've done a pretty good job as a state on distraction. We've seen fatalities go down since the EDUI law was passed in 2017. Our fatalities have been lower ever since the law changed, requiring you to use a hands-free device or only touch your phone once while you're driving. We've learned more, however, about patterns of distraction, and it seems like there are times where people feel like it's safer maybe or more appropriate to use a device. So we still need to educate them. Unlike impairment, where if they start the car and start driving when they're impaired, they're going to be impaired the entire time. Distraction is much more of a choice that people can make in the moment. So even if you're tempted to pick up your phone, you can remind yourself not to pick it up. Or if you start to pick it up, you can decide to put it down and not be distracted. So people are making some choices. They just need to continue to make better choices. Even if it's hands-free, people may think, I'm cruising along on the highway, so I can have this phone call. But, even if you're not touching your phone, you're still distracted, right? You can't pay the same attention to the road that you would if you were not having a phone conversation at the same time. And what people still, I think, need to learn is that your brain can't do both things well at the same time. You need to make a choice, to pull over and have your phone call or to be focused when you're behind the wheel and driving.
So many things competing for our attention behind the wheel, Mark. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. Mark McKechnie is the Communications and Policy Director for the Washington Traffic Safety Commission. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now, and make sure to join us this Saturday for a live taping of the show where I'll interview King County Executive Girmay Zahilay at the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. Get tickets at cascadepbs.org/Ideas Festival and use promo code Seattle Now to access a 20% discount. Today's episode was produced by Vaughn Jones. It was edited by Andy Hurst. Our production team also includes Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. Talk to you tonight for Evening Headlines.